So, this is my sabbatical. The whole idea was using design and thinking and making, okay, to create original fine art prints with integrating typography. And the idea was to explore typographic form to create these prints. But the mode of what I used was to go ahead and use wood type, and letterpress. So obviously not digital anymore, which is what obviously most people are using. So the idea was to go ahead and incorporate your aesthetics, your theory, your materials, the experience, as well as integrating art and design all together. So the idea of thinking through making. So, being a graphic designer, being a fine artist, it was a perfect time to incorporate both of those together. So I decided, which I love type and message making from what the words come from, and the shapes and the forms of type. So taking some of the design elements and the design, elements and applying them to how type is designed as well. Every typeface has the same, with lines, shapes, counters, swashes, from decorative elements to punctuation, and how they can all interrelate outside of the norm. And that's part of what I actually get into a lot of, is talking away from what is typically done with letters. So here's the theoretical part, and I don't know if you all have ever read, a gentleman by the name of Michael Gelb has written a book on how to think like Leonardo da Vinci. And it is a great, very easy read. Actually, it should be one that I think from the if we ever really taught a creative class, which is one I would love to do. He talks about 7 Da Vincian principles, okay? And or email me and I'll tell you. Actually, Tom Zanakis has turned me on to this one, okay? And what this gentleman did is he actually has studied Da Vinci's life, both as a man and his methods. So he's come up with these 7 principles. The first is curiosita, which is an insatiably curious approach to life and an unrelenting quest for continuous learning, a desire to know, learn, and grow. Demonstración is a commitment to test knowledge through experience, persistence, and a willingness to learn from mistakes, freeing the mind from limiting habits and preconceptions, typical packaging.
Right.
Sensación is the continual refinement of the senses, especially sight, as the means to enliven experience. Sfumato, which means going up in smoke, is a willingness to embrace ambiguity, paradox, and uncertainty. It is the trait of creative people.
Mm-hmm.
Art and science is the development and balance between science and art, logic and imagination. It's the whole brain thinking. Corporalidad is the cultivation of grace, ambidexterity, fitness, and poise. And conescence is the recognition of and appreciation for the interconnectedness of all things and phenomena. That is systems thinking. So actually this book goes into detail and gives specific examples throughout, and it's a great book.
And the examples, are they Leonardo's?
Some are Leonardo, some are what's happening contemporary-wise. So yeah, it's just, I assume we have it here, but it's well worth it. It's an easy, book. Because I think, and I'll tell you all, and especially since this is much smaller, it's what we teach.
Mm-hmm.
It's exactly what we teach. Think out of the box,
right.
Be creative, figure out how that systems is going to work, because this stops here, doesn't do anything. It's where you take it from. So it's a great little book to talk about. So, there's another really good quote. According to Gelb's theory, the finest teachers know that experience is the source of wisdom. And I like that one because so many of us in the practicing fields understand how you can teach that in a classroom. And I think that was just, I find that's very important. So as a graphic designer, artist, professor, part of my experience is from the professional as well as the creative end. I use direct observation, hands-on, a lot of technical, both digital or whether it's a binding machine, whether it's stretching a canvas, stretching paper, doesn't matter. So it's a lot of hands-on and technical. So how we reach each other is through aesthetic values, and you become responsive, and hopefully it will move the spirit. So I had this opportunity, okay, to a hands-on experience using wood type, letterpress, and the idea of hand inking. Everything became one. So I used these century-old wood type. I used the letter forms to become a visual language in itself. Okay, they're the images, they are the design, they are the shape, and they have an aesthetic value to them. So you have your aesthetic and it's personal. What I want to do is just set the stage now and tell you a little bit about my experience. Okay. This is interesting because this has the full image. This is the Hamilton wood type, actually it's the Hamilton wood type company this time. And this is in Two Rivers, Wisconsin. And at one point in time, it was the largest manufacturing of wood typefaces in America. And great history about how wood type became used. Some details from their historical last book about them. In 1880, an entrepreneur by the name of James Edward Hamilton fulfilled his dream of founding his own company. His product, wood type, became the printer's choice across the United States. Hi, I started a little early and I know everybody's running late, but...
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, come on in. So it's the robust growth in demand for the newspapers and printed advertisements after the Civil War, which created an unprecedented market for large, inexpensive typefaces. Now, type had been hand cast in metal for centuries, well, yeah, some centuries actually, Gutenberg, right? So you can't take metal type and use huge letters, right? You can't lift them. I have pieces of metal type that are heavy when they're only this big. So the idea of wood type was inexpensive, easy to reproduce, and so therefore you have the growth, well, because of the growth of advertising as well. So the emergence of the printing industry in general was one of the engines of the Industrial Revolution. A little more local. In the second half of the 19th century, okay, Two Rivers, Wisconsin was a lumber town, and it still looks like a lumber town. It's a wonderful place. Very depressed, but really just cool. So you have all the logging industry in northern Wisconsin. So Two Rivers is obviously where they're bringing the logs down. Makes sense. You've got these two rivers, so it becomes a manufacturing lumber town. So this young man, Ed Hamilton, grows up surrounded by lumberjacks, sawmills, machinery, and becomes a skilled woodworker. And in 1880, I have to laugh because I'll tell you a little more detail. Since this is a small group, this is about my sabbatical and using wood type to create art, my prints. A gentleman by the name of William Nash, who was the publisher of the Two Rivers Chronicle, had agreed to produce some large posters for the town's grand ball. As in typical fashion, still in 2015, he didn't have enough time to go get the wood from the East Coast. So he had heard about this young guy, Ed Hamilton, who was a beautiful wood carver, and asked him to carve the large letters for the poster to be printed. I'm thinking it's still, we're done. People don't plan ahead. So anyway, he actually used Hollywood type. What's being used now is maple and end maple, but he actually developed this very inexpensive way of producing letters. And then he went back to the more traditional. But that's a whole nother presentation about it. It's a great museum. So anyway, we have, from this grand ball, he had started his business. And it is now still in existence. The company has been bought out numerous times. It's now Fisher Hamilton Incorporated. And on a side note, this is nothing, I don't have to be formal. Really neat place, because what he ended up doing is they were making wood type. From that, he had his friend who was a dentist who said, I need some way, some kind of cabinetry to store my tools. So, because they're trying to figure out ways to store type as they're producing. So he has these thin little drawers, right, printer drawers. He takes that and converts it for dental equipment. From that is where they started the whole idea of medical drawers. He was the first. Hamilton Wood Company designed originally even the beds that we sit on were all the wood beds. So they had one little part of the museum that is all these inventions that came from this guy carving type. So it's a great history. And then I'll show you in the one, you're going to notice they were well, I won't tell you yet, but anyway, it's just a great little place. So anyway, back in, I will tell you right now, the first time I went out to Two Rivers, the factory was there. This is a couple acres, it's massive. When I was out last fall, they were tearing it down, and by Thanksgiving of last year was when the last bricks. It became an eyesore. The museum was in here, and there were like 4 people in this entire thing looking like this. You know, it was dripping, and they knew they had something. So there was a big push through the AIGA, American Graphic Arts, to raise money, and they had about a year to get everything out and find a space, which they did, right around the corner. So the museum exists in this great, I mean, it's warehousing, but it's a great space with a lot of room for growth. What was really interesting is the local people really didn't, I think some felt bad that it was going down, but they recycled all the stuff. It was
not to redevelop it.
They could. It's so massive, and so there's no industry out there. There's nothing.
Yeah, but I've seen in Worcester, Massachusetts, and
but they're
Bristol, Rhode Island, they've taken these huge.
Oh, but they used all this equipment. I mean, they used all the structured materials, but because they were making piles, I'd go over at lunchtime and kind of watch what they were doing, the cranes. But a lot was being shipped, especially a lot of the wood structures and the bricks to Asia, which I thought was interesting. So,
Asia?
Yeah, I know.
It's like cold there, why not?
Yeah.
And by the way, right across the street from the main entrance is where the first ice cream sundae was served. And you can go into the ice cream parlor, it's so cute. And above that is a little local museum that they've turned into it, was the dance hall where the grand ball. So they still have the original house where the ice cream sundae and where you could see the town ball.
Do they have
the town
posters?
They have all sorts of stuff. So, actually it's a little grungy, but, Anyway, great little story about this town. So the Hamilton Manufacturing Company, as it closed, we now have the museum, which opened in 1999. Okay, it is currently home to one of the largest collections of wood type. It has printing presses. It's got woodcuts. It has original type catalogs, pieces from the 1840s. It has replicas of Ben Franklin. It's a current replica of a Ben Franklin press. They have got all sorts of both wood and metal type. They have broadsides. So they have a ton of stuff that they're still trying to catalog. Students go in as volunteers to catalog. I would love to get a group of students to go out there, but the expenses would be, it's nice if we were in the Midwest, but we're not. So anyway, it's now currently a living museum. They have full displays on how wood type was made. They actually are they've gotten a grant for the older people who had worked in the factory to teach how to use some of the equipment. So they actually, just when I was there, were starting to pull off some of their one-off typefaces again. So they're actually producing very limited basis, some of their wood type. but you get to see the whole process, which is really fascinating. And what I was going to tell you about the additional items that have been created, but the Hamilton clothes dryer, they were the first company to produce a clothes dryer. So from wood type to a clothes dryer. It's fascinating. It's actually a true story. I mean, it's what America is to me. I mean, you have these small towns where things just grow, and so it's actually, they're very proud people. So anyway, here I am. They have the museum. They have workshops, which I'll talk to you about a workshop I did. They do school tours. They do artist in residency, which is what I had done. So having to start with my basic knowledge of what I have done, I've done some setting of metal type. Doing this is hard. There are millions of pieces of type. There's all different sizes, there are different typefaces. So where to start? My original conception, what I went in to do, just completely changed. And it actually took me a good couple days before I started to figure out this entire series, which was nothing that I expected to be doing. So anyway, it's hard work. Part of what I find is I find the beauty in the letter forms. I find that you get into it, you get into the zone of creating all of this, and you start thinking, who else was using this type? Where else was it being used? It has great mystery and history to it, and I think that is all part of the process, the craft of creating. Even ads, your large ads was just fascinating. Creating is very much similar from what I was doing on Letterpress to what I do on the computer to what we do in fine arts with painting and printmaking. You are doing your brainstorming, you're sketching, you are looking at composition. The processes are all the same. I mean, the whole process is the same. What's different is the topic, the material, and what the outcome is. So this was actually part of the 25. Little corner of the 25, I think that was the 25. So, one of, and I'm going to go back to Gail, the idea of sfumata, my Italian is failing me. The idea of the willingness to let things go up in smoke, see what happens, the ambiguity of the uncertainty. I found that really fascinating. To work day after day. You're looking at using color theory, because I had my basic 4 inks. I did bring metallic though. So I've got to be using my color theory to hand mix all the inks. Composition, questioning when I'm printing what's happening with paper, ink hitting paper, different types of paper, different weights of paper, different colors of paper. So all of these ideas start to blend together. Aesthetic decision making, and that's how we work. So the experience was thrilling. I will tell you, it is dirty. It is physical. I cannot imagine how these pressmen could stand for 8, 10, 12 hours a day using these presses. I mean, it killed my back by the end. No matter how many mats you can put on the floor. It is physical. It is tremendous physical, moving, carrying, lifting. It's just amazing. It's uncertain. Every time you're inking, you might have not rolled it correctly, and then something wouldn't work. The idea of make-readying the press, making sure that everything is solid, the weight, the pressure is okay. It was filled with what I call anima, the creative ability. And actually, that's the Latin, anima means creative ability. So I think that we as designers and artists, one of the biggest things I think that as educators, we try and tell people to think out of the box, be creative, don't be scared of taking, like Jean said, the risks. Move forward and see what happens. And I think that they have to be original. The idea of originality is a struggle almost every day. So anyway, I'm going to tell you a little bit about, these are just being on the press, talking about dirty and precise. Oh my God, registration. These presses didn't have registration. You know, I can't tell you how many times I would get on the third proof and I messed up my registration. These are just some of the pieces. I have my portfolio. I have two things that I want to talk to you all about. Here I am. This is Mixon, and this is the larger press. I liked working on a show card press, a little bit smaller, a little more personal. I'm still a beginner in that area. I did jump onto one of the bigger presses. Most of my work was one-offs. If I were doing a series of advertisements and needed to print 100 or 1,000, I would have used a different press where you could be producing them constantly. So one of the things that I had the opportunity to do when I was there was to participate in a workshop. And this workshop had type cuts and pieces, very limited because they haven't cataloged it all, from the Globe Printing Company in Chicago. And their clients were the rodeo, the circus, and advertisements for grocery stores. So they had some of the wildest stuff that really, truly, this wasn't that creative, it was just fun. And I already had known how to print, so a lot of the other participants were learning the whole process and the history, but I just got to have some fun in the big press and do stuff. So having a very limited choice of cuts to use, I'm thinking, I gotta put some message out there. So hence the reason that I have these free drinks, pickles and tomatoes. Absolutely no sense, but they were pieces from, you can come up, this is just one I actually hang this in my kitchen. Finding similar typefaces, I mean, it was a very scattered type of thing. And on that note, I'll just show you a couple other cuts that people, bringing back memories. Do you remember the Mad Mouse? I love this little free thing, circus. And the other one, and really truly, this has nothing to do with creative, I've got creative here. The other is all the circus stuff. So it was just so much fun. I mean, the history of these things is fascinating. And I have another one that was a metal cut of a roller coaster from about the 1940s. You have the people coming down and they're smiling, and it's just, I didn't bring that because that's framed in them too. But I will ask if you all want to see some of the work I did. This, I'm going to explain this. This was another one, this was on the big press. But when you look at wood type, when each of these numbers, I mean, it's beautiful. And actually, I think you had asked me at one point, Robin, what was my favorite thing out of all of it? Day to day, my absolute favorite thing was at the end of the day, cleaning the wood. Because you've got all your chemicals and you're cleaning off all the inks, your desk is a mess, so you're cleaning rollers, actually that, I use that for a couple when I clean the rollers, some mixed colors. But you see how beautiful that wood is. And when you are oiling it down and stuff, it is, and they're hundreds of years old, some of it. It's great stuff. So anyway, it was really cool to be able to have, they have a couple pieces of type that are a couple feet high, which take a couple people to get up onto the presses and stuff. So it was really pretty neat. I mean, we take this stuff for granted these days, so it's pretty amazing. On a side note, an area that I'm still working on, and you'll see one of the prints in here, is most of the letterpress you see these days is done digitally, right? It's set up in InDesign or any of them, and then printed on a letterpress. So I've got a company here, a small business that I use their presses, but I did a bunch of my, these are polymer plates, which if you talk to the purists, these are just horrendous things and they've destroyed the industry. It's great to hear what goes on with them. What I've done though is, because of my travels and taking the students to Greece, I actually took a lot of my own photos and then integrated typography into these. And they hadn't done it either on what resolution of Photoshop would work, etc. So there's a whole series. It's actually going back to darkrooms where you're doing positive and negative prints and wiping off the film. It's like going 10 steps back to where we were. I'm finished shop.
Sorry.
That's okay. I'm actually finishing up. So
We'll come in and get the last bit.
you come and see some of the pieces I did. You're coming in and see. So anyway, this is another interesting area where from the creative end versus the commercial end that I've been working with and exploring as well. And I'm just going to, I can show you all, or you all can come up. I don't, however you all want to do it. Some of the pieces that have been, I've done using the type. Most of the pieces have some or at least one, or if not all, wood type that have from the Greek alphabet. When we were in Greece 2 years ago, Tom Zanakis and I were in the black market and found crates of wood type and metal type, and I would have taken it all. Couldn't get it home, right? So then, of course, if anybody ever deals with the bartering system in Greece, the minute they knew you were interested, the price went way up. So it was great. Tom's in there yelling at them, like going, woo. So a lot of the pieces that I did, I wanted to incorporate Greek letters purely as shapes and forms. So these are some of the pieces. This one is just regular script type, using patterns, patterning, different types of inking, which could be, the inking is a whole different story. You can see you can use just ink with one letter, which creates a different piece. Here's a piece with just the Greek letters, not all the ones I have. And then, well, we have a whole series of just 3 beautiful pieces of wood type, just chunky things. So,
Bridget, sorry, is it okay if I pull up my presentation?
yes, go ahead. And actually, I can leave these for after, but you know, the integration of using letters and letter forms to create all the different pieces, and I know everybody's running behind. This was the series that ended up being, these were one-offs, but these are all printed series. And when I talked about the differences in papers, many different types of papers. This is Crane, 100%. I had to bring out all my own paper. Left a lot of paper, brought home my Crane paper because it's extremely expensive. So you can see how ink hits differently. It absorbs differently on papers. Graphic designers know that when we spec brochures and any of that type of thing. So the pieces pretty much, and here's one where it's just a pure letter form, using color as a piece. All the printed pieces had to have the museum indicia on it, okay, for originality. This is another series, again, different, same imagery using, it's alpha to omega, or actually, this is an interesting one. Different messaging. I had the number 2 and decided that meant A to Z, and that is not what the message was. It was alpha and omega. So I had to pull that off. A lot of the type, because it is old, obviously, would start to chip. And they actually, by the time I got to this one, you can actually see the wood was really starting to come off. So what we would do is we would retire it. And that's actually one of the things they ask when you're in there. If you start to have wood that cracks or is starting to chip, you do want to go ahead and retire it. Another great example of how when, from the aesthetic aspect, I had brought metallic ink, as I said, everything had to be hand mixed, but the Greek shape here, obviously on a more coated sheet, is much more reflective than where it absorbs down. So these are just some of the things that, as you know, are aesthetic design decisions that we have to make. And then I have my zeros and O's, and all the different shapes and forms and transparencies. As I said, I find the papers reflect a lot. Some of my red ones and the different forms. I'll just show you actually just one last one, Kathleen, and then I will be out of your way. This is one of the pieces. Actually, I have a this is the digital piece. Okay, so I'm starting to work with the digital, but using the letterpress. Okay, so it's, as I said, I know the purists would hate me, and then it's just another way to explore something a little different. But it's kind of cool what's going on, and the whole idea of letterpress and the history of letterpress and the beauty of it, it's hand done, and I think people are getting tired of some of the all digital look. So I will stop there and let you go.